All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about, like I've mentioned, is the double-sided thing. The fact that leaves are different on one side than the other. So you could consider them to have a front and a back. So to look at an example of that, what I've done is I've just gone and let me just go in here, scanned some leaves just to make it apparent. So let's say we go and grab any of these. Let's say we grab these two. And what we're looking at is just a regular scan. So just, going outside, grabbing some leaves, putting them on a scanner. And we can see that for this leaf, the front and the back are rather different. And so that's something you're going to see on just about any leaf. And so this is something where you're going to want to, if you're really trying to get your leaves to look realistic, especially if they're going to be close up, you're going to need to take the time to make a double-sided shader and also take the time to also potentially make the bump map that might correspond to that. Because in here, if I make this grayscale, you can see that this area or this vein down the center is almost darker than the surrounding area, although we intuitively know that that bumps out. And so that's where you might need to invert this for a bump map. But more to the point is just the difference in color that you see. Generally, one side is going to be a little bit more saturated than the other side. So if we take a look at another leaf, let's say we grab, this one, and these are just scanned on a flatbed scanner, and you can see again, there's quite a bit of a difference between the two. But usually if you take, the front side and you just desaturate it, it's not necessarily going to look like what we were seeing on the other side. So it's a little bit more yellow as well. So the first thing you're going to want to do is to create or have a texture that correlates to that, which, in texture libraries can easily find scans of leaves, but they don't necessarily have the front and the back. So again, it is really easy to just scan your own. And so here is an example of what you're looking for. Is you want to have a front texture and a back texture. Clearly they need to be aligned with each other correctly. And then you can see in here that they both have the exact same alpha channel. So really the difference is just what we're seeing in the RGB. And then you would end up creating two MIA materials, one for the front, one for the back, and then plugging those into a two-sided utility that allows you to assign them that way. So as far as creating them, if you need to, it's obviously very simple if you scan the same leaf. Meaning that if we go in here and decide we want to, let's say, use this one as an example. So I would just go and take the scan of the back and copy it and paste it on here. And then I would end up needing to flip it horizontally to get them to line up. So we'll see that I have front and back. Then I'll lower the opacity on this guy and hit Control T so that I can go in and get them to be aligned with each other. And let me just turn snapping off. And so this is something that'll just require a little bit of noodling, maybe with the arrow keys, so that I have it basically correct. So I can see if I turn one on and the other off, they're pretty much in line with each other. It doesn't have to be perfect. Then what you're going to want to do is I'm going to, right now this is set as the background, so I'm just going to copy that layer and delete that. And you have to create the alpha channel. So which one you create it for doesn't matter so much. So if I just grab this layer, I can simply go and erase out what's not needed. But to make it easier to see what you're erasing, I'll put a layer behind it, which I will set to just be black, solid color, so that when I'm erasing, it's just going to be very obvious what I'm revealing. So if I zoom in here on this leaf and then just sort of do a quick erasing of the easiest bits, And obviously, for what's closer to the leaf, I'll take a little bit more care. But that's the bulk of it. And then now I can go in and get a little bit more specific in erasing out a mask for it. And just wanting to get rid of any white fringe that might exist on the leaf. So if I cut into it a little bit, it really doesn't matter. And so I'd want to go and do this for the entire leaf. So for this example, I probably could have used a simpler leaf, since this one has a little bit more complexity to it. So what I'll do is I'll create this mask and be right back. All right, so I've now erased all of the white that was inside this image, and by putting on a black background, it's very apparent, you know, if I've missed anything. And so what I want to do is I can select the pixels by right-clicking on that layer, and then I can go to this layer that I have right there, and I can easily invert and delete the pixels there as well. And so if I look at it, I can see that there's a little bit of white fringe on this one. And so what that means is that this one, you know, needs to have a little bit of it erased as well. So I'll just go inside there to the eraser and just get rid of whatever I need to get rid of. So just removing white fringe that I see in different spots. And so for this, I'm using a tablet. It's easier. And while you could use something like the magic wand tool or, you know, a keying tool to get rid of the white, that's up to you. And so at this point, I have something that's pretty clean. So that means there's fewer pixels in this one than in the other. So I'll end up using the mask from this layer for the other layer. So now that I've done that, I'll select pixels on this guy, go to this layer, and then I can hide the layer and rather invert that mask and delete out. So that right now both of these have exactly the same silhouette is the point. And then I can select those pixels and then save the selection as a new alpha channel. So select, save selection, new channel. So if I now go out here, I have an alpha channel, as we can see, that would be used for transparency. And then the next thing that's a good idea to do is for both of these guys, let me put the opacity to 100%. And then for this one, the color that's behind it, I'll just eyedrop a green from in here and then just fill that layer. And then I'll make a new layer between this and that. I will select a pixel from this guy, just some average color, and fill that. So that if I do, you know, just to reduce any fringing, and if this one looks like, you know, I picked a color that's maybe, you know, could have been a little bit darker, I can go and grab that. But either way, this now represents the front, and this represents the back of that leaf, as we can see. So now, let me just zoom out a little bit. There's a little bit of white fringe in there on this guy, as we can see. So that's easily resolved by going in and just erasing some of that fringe out. But since now I made a change to this guy, I would want to select pixels, go to this guy, and delete, or rather invert the selection, and then delete. So now they're the same. And then I can go to this guy and get rid of that alpha channel that I made. So delete channel. Go here and select pixels, and then save selection as my alpha channel, which again is my transparency map. So now if I go back to RGB, I can now take this guy and take a look at it. And everything looks good. Looks like on the color here, there's something funky there. So I'm just going to erase part of it that I didn't get rid of. So it looks like there's just a little bit of miscellaneous doodad there. Let me zoom in, and that's just an artifact. It's not actually there. Burk. And go in here, go to 100%. Okay. So now what I want to do with this is I can go in and choose to make it square if I want to. My canvas is not big enough to make it square, so canvas size. Let's make things a little bit bigger. So I can make my square selection here. So that basically the stem kind of lines up with the center there. Crop that. And then this I just need to then extend out. And I can see that there is, on this guy, a little bit of junk that I can erase out. And then here, same thing. I'll just scale that solid color to fill it. So now I have the front of the leaf and the back of the leaf, as well as an alpha channel. So that's how you'll go about making your own. So for this, I now need to save these out. And so I'm going to go and take this. And let's say we save the front out first. So save as. Let's call that leaf B front. And specifically, if we're going to start making other channels, this would be front color. And I'll save this as TIFF with alpha channel. And so also, by the way, to make my life a little bit easier also, I'm going to duplicate this. So at this point, this is the back. I will flatten it. This is the front, and I will flatten it. So that these are both flattened documents, but they still retain their alpha channels. And then I will save this out. So I'll save it as a TIFF with alpha channel. So this is leaf B front color. And then save this out as leaf B back color. And so when I specify calling it color, well, what I'm getting at is that we might want to generate other channels for this. So like I was saying earlier, if you look at this and you make it grayscale, does that look like it would make a good bump map? Well, for this, we can see that the areas that are supposed to be elevated are a lighter value, so that's okay. Even if they weren't in the bump node, I can also make a negative bump instead of a positive bump. And then obviously there's also the option to adjust contrast so that it's a little bit more dramatic of a change between the two if you want. So we're not going to worry about that too much for the moment. The main thing is that we have a front and a back, where each one has an alpha channel. So now the issue is what to do in Maya so that we can get that to work. So you can see we have leaf A front and back, and leaf B front and back. So for Maya, so now to figure out how to create the double-sided shader. Let's say we start with, doesn't really matter, let's say we take these shrubs. So I'm going to hide everything else. We'll zoom in on our shrubs. And there's our directional light. So we can see where it's at. Okay. So for this, let's first do a render so we can see what things are. Well, we don't need to do that. I think we kind of know what it's going to look like. But let's go to Hypershade. And let's graph the material for the leaves. So there it is. And so what we want to do is basically create another shading network, a copy of this that's going to be used for the back side of the leaf. And for this guy, let's go in and use a different leaf texture just for the purposes of this. We're going to use the one that we created. So I'll get rid of that stucco for now. So they're all the same color. But I'm going to change the file texture that's being used. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change it to, let's go out here. And let me actually go and, one sec. Sorry about that. Maya decided to act a little weird. I'm going to go to the file texture and let's grab, actually let me go here, let's find the leaf scans. Alright, so we have our front and back. So let's grab the front color, map that in here. And so with this, now we'd want to do a render, just so we can see if this is working correctly, the texture that we created, as just a regular texture. So this is now assigned to our leaves. So let's go to render view and check that out. All right, so that rendered, save that out. So we can see that we have our new leaf texture that's mapped onto here. And so what we now want to do, going back to Hypershade, is again create the shader for the backside. So if I select this shading group, I'm going to duplicate the network. And then for this network that we have inside here, this is shrub mesh leaf. And so this one is something that we could call front, and we could call this back just to be clear. So shrub mesh leaf front. And shrub mesh leaf back. Okay. And then for this duplicate, we obviously, let me just move some of these things out of here. We want to swap this file texture, where this one is getting the front, and this one is going to get the back. So let's go back to here. So maps, leaf scans, and the back. All right. So this has the front, as we can see there, and this has the back. All right. So again, they're rather similar, but as we saw in Photoshop, there is definitely a difference in regards to color and saturation. So now, this shader, if we were to assign it to our leaves, would just get all of them to have that. So how do we get the front to be one color and the back to be another? So for that, we're going to use the MIB two-sided utility. So under Mental Ray, if you go to Sample Compositing, you'll see MIB two-sided. I'm going to create that. And then I'm going to middle mouse button drag one of my MIA materials. And the way you connect it is I'll just grab the result and connect it to the front. And for this guy, simply result going to the back. The thing though is that you can't right click on the two-sided node and assign it to your object. So the way that you're going to do that is go to Maya Surface and create a surface shader. This will act as a pass-through node where you can go and take, let's go to Other, the out value of the MIB two-sided and connect that to the out color of the surface shader. And so the surface shader doesn't calculate lighting, and so it's just going to pass through the information. And then you'll be able to select the leaves of the shrub that we have there and assign that surface shader. So it will look a little funky in Hypershade as far as the preview, just Hypershade doesn't know how to represent it, but it will render correctly. So we did our render with just the single side and we saved it. What we're going to do just first to make things very blatantly obvious that we have an effect is let's go and adjust our ramp. I'm just going to go to color balance. We can see that the color gain just has that ramp, but let's say we go to color offset and give it a color like so. So that clearly one side is very, very different than the other. So now with it assigned, again, select the leaf and assign the surface shader. Let's now do another render. All right, so it looks silly, but the point is just that we're getting one shader on one side and one shader on another. And so it becomes apparent when looking at these shrubs where we're seeing one side and where we're seeing the other side. So it's a good way to obviously add a little bit of organic randomization into the way the leaves look on your plants. And so here what we actually want to do though is obviously get this color offset to be black. So we're not offsetting the color. So the change that we would get would be subtle. Let's go back in here, and again the display is going to be a little wonky, but that's all right. And let's render it again. Okay, so that finished. And so what we'll see if we compare these two renders, where in this render all of the leaves are using the same texture for both sides of each leaf versus this one where we have a front and a back, is that we're getting more breakup in the color and the value distribution. So if you pick a specific spot and look at it with your eyes, as I switch between the two, let's say in this region right there, you can see how it goes from all being the same hue to having some breakup, which adds a lot more depth to the plant and just in the end makes it feel a little bit more natural. So combine this with, let's say, a 3D texture like that stucco that's randomizing the color, and it's going to start looking more believable. Then of course there's the issue of having different leaf textures so that every leaf isn't using the same texture for the front. So you, instead of having a texture where it's just a single leaf, you can have a texture where there's, let's say, a group of 4 different leaves, 4 different fronts, and 4 different backs, and your leaves are randomly selecting from those. And then that's going to add even more sort of organic, natural variety into the bush plant. And then, of course, all of this applies to trees. So that's how to use the MIB two-sided material. So again, when I hit 6, it doesn't like it, doesn't know how to display it, but it does work. So let's look one more time in Hypershade. Let's select the leaf. Let's graph it. And this is what you want your shading network to look like. So we have one network for the front, one network for the back, going into an MIB two-sided, which is outputting its, just go inside here, outputting the out value into the color of a surface shader, which is assigned. And the connection to two-sided is again result. So result to back and result to front. And so inside here, this is the front texture and this is the back texture. Clearly, depending on how you've oriented the leaves inside here, you might need to swap the textures of what's front and what's back. You could also flip the normals on your leaves, and that would be an easy way to do it as well. So now that we've seen the MIB two-sided and know how to make a double-sided shader, the next thing that I'll show you is how to take something like this where every single leaf is getting the exact same texture and adding some variety to that. And this is something that right now the UVs for these leaves in here are organized so that every single leaf is using the same sort of 0 to 1 quadrant. And so what we want to do is make a change there. So if I open the window UV texture editor for the leaves, open this up and turn off the texture, you can see that each leaf is filling 0 to 1. And so therefore they're all going to get that leaf texture. So what we want is to organize it so that each leaf is maybe, instead of 0 to 1, is just one leaf is here, one leaf is here, and so forth. And each leaf just has its UVs scaled down into a single quadrant, but it's organized so that each leaf has a different spot. And that's something that there's a useful script that allows you to do that, which I will show you next. So whether you want a 2x2 or a 3x3, it's very, very easy to do. So that's two-sided shaders for leaves. So now let's move on.